Our next speaker is Renessa Rabenda. She is currently a senior at James Madison University, and she will be speaking on the deconstruction of the female identity. So welcome, Renessa.
Thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to say a special thank you to Dr. Maureen Shanahan, who helped with the presentation, as well as the art history department at James Madison University. So one of the few female Daddists working in the early 20th century, Hannah Höch represents a turning point for women in the arts. Her series, The Ethnographic Museum, utilizes photomontage to reconstruct and deconstruct female identity by taking images from various sources to critique gender representation in the arts. Building upon the research of Maud Lavin, Matthew Barreau, and Peter Boswell, we will specifically review two pieces from this series that seek to reclaim the image of the female identity, highlighting Höch's impact of photomontage on other artists like Paula Modersohn-Becker, Suzanne Duchamp, and Martha Rosler. At the time of the Ethnographic Museum's conception in 1924, Europe, especially Germany, was experiencing social changes, including female emancipation, growth of mass media, and the effects of World War I. Höch's experimental photomontages use appropriated images from film and magazines, like The Practical Berlin Woman, to create social and political commentary on the evolving role and identity of the now Frau, or new woman, in the Weimar Republic, who was able to have a career outside the home and participate in politics. Indian Female Dancer and Untitled are prime examples from this series. Indian Female Dancer is a collage using ink, metallic foil, and magazine imagery that depicts a frontal portrait of a woman on sepia-toned paper. Her body is cropped at the neck and appears to be crying, noted by a singular gray mark descending from her right eye. No hair is showing. Instead, the dancer is wearing a crown of metallic rectangles and cutout patterns for spoons, knives, and forks. On the left side, an African mask covers the woman's left eye, eyebrow, and mouth. The dancer is actress Renée Falconetti, a popular film star in the 1920s, taken from her role as Joan of Arc in Carl Theodor Dreyer's film, La Passion de Joan of Arc. Here, Falconetti reenacts the saint's mockery for belief in God's mission, symbolized by the woven crown, which references Christ's crown of thorns. However, Höch's crown of silverware alludes to women's role in the traditional private domestic sphere of the kitchen. Meanwhile, the mask is known as the Kam dance mask from the Beka people of Cameroon, that's worn by Juju dancers during funerals and ancestral rituals. Combined, the mask and image of Falconetti transform the woman into a dancer, liberated through contextual self-expression as dancer and actress. Yet, her suffering, referenced by the tear, illustrates the constraints of social norms as the smiling mask conceals expressive features like the eyes and mouth, subverting the original emotion of Joan of Arc's pain and suffering, which argues for a silencing of female authority, as well as echoing the colonial roots of Cameroon, a former French-occupied and German colony. Thus, the Indian female dancer represents the complexities and intersectionalities of identity. Rather than essentializing a culture through iconography like Picasso's Les Demoiselles of Avignon, Höch stated that, with the series, I wanted to shine light on the unscrupulous and simplistic use of African sculpture that was flooding Europe at the time. The sentiment highlights photomontage's ability to critically comment on and specifically address a German female audience to highlight how they are presented or constructed in the eyes of male creators. Untitled is a composite of a female figure that stands on a blue semicircle with a bright red background. The bottom half of the figure is an archaic sculpture, beginning slightly above the chest and extending to sandaled feet. The sculpture wears a long pleated skirt and decorative belt with 3 charms. Her torso is voluptuous with an hourglass figure, exposed breasts, and accentuated navel. Moving upwards, her shoulders and arms are disproportionate in relation to the torso, as the arms extend outward as if resting on a counter, while her head sits on her forearms. Her face is classically beautiful with pale skin, blonde hair, strong cheekbones, similar to the image of a film star. Finally, an enlarged black and white image of the right eye replaces the original. Here, Untitled comments on female objectification and sexualization throughout art history. Found in an Angkor temple in Cambodia, the torso is believed to be Uma, the mother goddess and consort of Shiva. While her accentuated breasts and hips present a sensual presentation of the female figure, in reality, they reference fertility. This duality of purpose fragments the perception of a woman's body in society that constricts autonomy and structures female actions to conform to the norm. Furthermore, female nudity was only seen in biblical or mythological scenes and intended for the male gaze. This voyeuristic genre had women looking away from the viewer. Yet the starlet's enlarged eye gazes forward, directly confronting the viewer and metaphorically confronts the patriarchal representations of women in popular culture. Meanwhile, her short hair signifies the changing concept of femininity seen in the new woman, who is described as being mannish. Here signifies contrasting beauty standards. The defiant nature of these physical properties assert her control and power over a body that juxtaposes against the ancient sculpture. Furthermore, as well, the new woman is intertwined here in a rich history of ownership, much like Höch's combination of inanimate relics of non-Western cultures and popularized images of European women. In comparison to Hannah Höch, the 19th century artist Paula Modersohn-Becker began the first conceptions of the free female figure using her own body to negate the sensuous. Paula Modersohn-Becker, a Fauvist painter, was one of the first modern women to challenge female representation in art, serving as a potential influence for the later Hannah Höch. The female figure was a motif throughout her career, creating new gender presentations, such as the nude and self-portraiture. Self-Portrait, age 30, Sixth Wedding Day, was her most controversial painting. The unnaturalistic portrait of Becker presents her partially clothed from the waist down in a white linen cloth, wearing an amber bead necklace that accentuates her exposed breasts. Her stomach is round and protruding, referencing pregnancy, with her arms wrapped protectively around her midsection. Her head is tilted slightly to her right, with her eyes looking directly forward. Written on the bottom of the page is the inscription, "I painted this at the age of 30 on my 6th wedding day, PB." Utilizing an anti-classical style to present her self-perception, Becker's wide-eyed gaze confronts the viewer, illustrating a lack of shame in her nudity. Rather than being idealized or eroticized, as typically seen in works by male counterparts like Matisse and Gauguin, her arms, hands, and skirt do not attempt to hide her figure, but accentuate her pregnancy to reappropriate power. However, Becker was not pregnant when she painted this. Thus, her phantom pregnancy is a metaphor for autonomy and the creation of a symbolic new life as an artist, since after separating from her husband, she stated, "Now that I am free, I will make something of myself." Höch's Entitled and Modersohn-Becker's Self-Portrait deconstruct stereotypical notions of powerlessness associated with female identity. While their unclothed torsos emphasize female characteristics, the positioning of their arms and hands recontextualize the meaning of the nude that typically denotes vulnerability. More importantly, both construct a new woman. In Becker's painting, her hands rest on her pregnant stomach and assert power and pride in a woman's ability to create new life. This pride also references Becker's desire to be seen as a respected artist among colleagues. The various female body parts in Höch's Entitled insinuate a creation of new life, as each fragment is taken from various contexts and recombined to create a new narrative. The layering of images demonstrates a chronology, beginning in ancient times with the Uma figure and ending with the enlarged eye that constructs a shifting identity. The Uma figure highlights the traditional representation of females as fertile, motherly, and connected to nature. Conversely, the starlet resting her arms highlight the idea of the femme fatale that is waiting to be saved, as she looks downwards, not at the viewer, rendering her powerless to the observer. The enlarged eye finalizes the construction of the new woman who wants to be seen as equal in society, confronting a presumed male viewer. Becker references the concept of the new woman by being the first female artist to depict herself naked, announcing her transformation in her inscription, "I painted this at the age of 30 on my 6th wedding day, PB." The use of her initials PB signifies her maiden name, Paula Becker, and not her married name of Modersohn-Becker. She distances her married and single identities by referencing her 6th wedding anniversary in the title and embedding her life as a single individual in the painting. Both works highlight the continual need to question gender identity and its role in society, much like the work of Höch's contemporary Suzanne Duchamp. Suzanne Duchamp, known as the sister of artist Marcel Duchamp, Raymond Duchamp-Villon and Jacques Villon, was the only woman in the Paris Dada group. Her ready-made, a male and female threatened, depicts an erect crane at a 45-degree angle that extends diagonally across the page from the bottom right corner. Attached at the top of the crane is a silver gear that's connected to a metallic claw with a centrally placed vertical contour of a red rectangle. In the third half of the rectangle is a suspended clock gear and hanging plumb bob connected by wire. Behind the clock gear is the contour of an arc that protrudes from a miniature rectangle in the bottom right corner. As well, on the bottom right is the collage's title with an emphasis on the on and un that have been capitalized. Duchamp's use of machinery references the rapid industrialization and social changes of modern society. The capitalization of on and un references people, thus humanizing the industrial objects, while emphasizing the relationship between man and woman. The male subject is represented by the phallic crane and claw, while the female counterpart is symbolized by the rectangle, the encompassed gears, and arc. In the title, A Male and Female Threatened, both are threatened by socio-political changes. In the modern era, women became more represented in society as emancipation was more prevalent, seen through Duchamp's placement of the female figure in the center and its overlapping of the crane in the foreground. The use of the clock gear with the hanging plumb bob, which references a pendulum, induces the notion of time. As well, the connection between the gear and the discs by string evokes a circular motion. The placement of these objects in the vertical rectangle creates a memory of a grandfather clock, an object that references a paternal past. Much like the male figure's crane that is dark brown, as if it were resting, and the hanging claw that is unmoving. These elements suggest antiquated power of the patriarchy that is slowly being deconstructed. The prominence of the rectangle, rising like a monument of power from the center, asserts power and dominance. Completed 10 years after Paula Modersohn-Becker's self-portrait, Duchamp's A Male and Female Threatened is contemporary to the beginning of Höch's career, highlighting different modes of representing male and female dynamics. Although Duchamp chooses to represent the female body through mechanical forms, both she and Höch comment on the male gaze. In 1915, French photography critic Paul B. Haviland stated, "Man made the machine in his own image. Man makes this female machine and then worships it as an ideal," thus insinuating a sexualization and exploitation of woman as man uses her for his purpose, subjugating her to a standardized function like gender norms. Moreover, the idea that man made the machine in his own image can be translated to mass media representation like the popularized starlet and Indian female dancer. Each collage is a response to societal evolution. Duchamp represents the modern industrial world by using mechanical imagery. The machines are then seen as individuals, denoted by the pronouns on and un, that are learning how to interact in a changing society since there is no direct interaction between forms. In contrast, Höch dehumanizes her subject by utilizing irony, seen through images of the past, to critique the continual oppression of minority groups. For example, the crowning of falconetti. The crown of utensils contextualizes a private domestic sphere and mocks the new woman. As well, the title Indian Female Dancer objectifies Höch's subject, making falconetti an item on display rather than an individual with self-determination. Both Höch and Duchamp highlight the evolution of the female voice, representation, and power that contemporary artist Martha Rosler emphasizes. Martha Rosler is a contemporary artist whose work incorporates feminist issues and global activism. From 1966 to 1972, Rosler created a series of 31 photo montages entitled Body Beautiful, which uses magazine advertisements to comment on the display of the female figure for consumerist ventures. In an interview, Rosler stated that she used photo montage because it disrupts the notion of the real while still employing photographic material, which speaks to people with a great deal of intimacy. The original context of the advertisement is altered, but there is a harmonious connection. As well, the juxtaposition of women and their stereotypical representations in mass media highlight public ownership of identity that capitalism has created by taking advantage of women, using them for corporate profit. One example from Body Beautiful is Cold Meat 2. Cold Meat 2, a photo montage, presents a refrigerator with side-by-side doors. The left door is open, containing meat and other food products, while the right is closed, with exposed breasts. 3 strips of bricks are positioned in a descending fashion from the refrigerator, mirroring steps. The respective combination of breasts with a variety of meats creates an imagery of "you are what you eat," while simultaneously reducing women to a piece of meat. This juxtaposition between household appliances and the female form references the traditional role of women in the household. She, like the refrigerator, is an object that is used to facilitate work and ease the work of her presumed male counterpart, critiquing a woman's stereotypical role as nurturer or caregiver and central partner in consumerist culture. Martha Rosler's Body Beautiful and Hannah Höch's Ethnographic Museum use advertisements to express the exploitation of women. However, Rosler's photo montage series explicitly expresses feminist ideas, since Body Beautiful coincides with the women's liberation movement during the 1960s and 70s that fought for female equality. This wave of feminism deterred from the 1950s housewife, who cooked, cleaned, took care of her children, and doted on her loving husband. Cold Meat 2 discusses the image of female objectification, equating the female body to items of consumption, while referring to the domestic sphere of the kitchen, a stereotyped feminine domain. The imagery of the breasts evoke the idea of the good mother, who provides sustenance for her family as her breasts provide milk for her baby. The female body appears in fragmented parts that have been essentialized to perform a vital but overlooked function as a provider. Meanwhile, Höch implicitly informs the viewer. For Höch, the contextual influences for the Ethnographic Museum subtly refers to the injustices happening to women. The inception of Höch's New Woman in this series was tied to the beginning of the rise of National Socialism in Germany, which stressed the role of the woman in the home with her family. Höch presents classical imagery of Caucasian thin and blonde women. To contrast, Höch subverts their beauty with the images of non-Western art like African masks that reference subjugation of people seen as different. At this time, the first wave of feminism wanted liberation in order to vote, but not necessarily equality. Through subtle contextualization and the mixture of varying female bodies, Hannah Höch targets women and compels them through the distortions of the body to begin to examine their identity in society. Hannah Höch, Paula Modersohn-Becker, Suzanne Duchamp, and Martha Rosler revolutionized female representation. Höch's distortion of beauty led the charge in the creation of the prominent New Woman. The comparison of Hannah Höch to Paula Modersohn-Becker contextualized the beginning of women's desire for liberation and autonomy, while using Duchamp served as a contemporary foil that highlighted ideas regarding the female form and her function in society that differed cross-nationally. And finally, Martha Rosler presented a cross-temporal conflict of how women are still other in society. Pioneering in the Dada movement, Höch's work is a feminist foundation for female representation and the continuing fight for autonomy, presence, and societal acceptance in today's culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Renessa. So the first question that we have for you is, do you think Modersohn-Becker was also trying to create a lineage for herself in her inscription, almost similar to the way that Dürer used an inscription in his self-portrait whenever he was 28?
Would you repeat the second half of the question? It cut out a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. So do you think that she was also trying to create a lineage for herself in her inscription, similar to the way that Dürer used an inscription in his self-portrait?
I think so. During this time, women weren't prominently seen in art forms, especially during the Fauvist movement. We mainly study Gauguin and Matisse, and so her role in art history has taken more of a downplayed role. So I think for her, especially after separating from her husband and seeing what she could do as a single individual, I think having that inscription there was definitely informative of wanting to continue and being remembered as an artist rather than a mother or someone's wife.
And then the next question, are there examples of these feminist critiques between the time of Höch and Rosler? Does Rosler specifically talk about the influence of Höch or others on her own work?
Rosler has not commented from the research that I've done regarding any comparisons or influence from Hannah Höch. However, there have been studies and research more into the connection between Rosler and Höch. I think that Hannah Höch really began the beginning of the photo montage, so I have no doubt that Rosler in her many years of work did not come across Hannah Höch's.
So is there any additional research that you plan to do beyond what you've already accomplished?
I think I would like to study further female representation in the arts, especially when presented in a museum setting, since I will be going into museum education in the fall at Tufts. So I would like to see more research, especially the connections between Martha Rosler and Hannah Höch become a more prominent topic.
Yeah. If you were to add another artist to this comparison, who would you add?
Oh. That is a good question. I think just from my background as being a Spanish minor as well, I would want to include Frida Kahlo. I think that her work has definitely gotten a lot of attention, but I think that her conceptions of self and the identity of representing raw emotional status of the mind is something that I think is comparable to Hannah Höch and Paula Modersohn-Becker and Suzanne Duchamp, and as well as Martha Rosler.
Okay.
I think we're actually out of time at this point because we have one more element to the morning session. So I really want to thank you, Renessa, for this presentation, and thank you so much, Paige, for moderating all of the presentations this morning. And thanks to everyone for asking such great questions and really immersing yourself in all of these wonderful ideas. Now we're going to end